Question for the last speaker. So,
in Eastern philosophy and religion, there are techniques that have been used to, sound waves have been used to help with anxiety, depression, and stress-related illnesses or disorders. Like my yoga teacher relies on meditation techniques and the sound of the word Om, which supposedly helps in influencing the brainwaves. Have you been looking at that aspect, and what have been your own ideas of this? Because a lot of these are available on the net, and a lot of people are probably using this off the net.
Well, there are quite a lot of studies which show EEG changes in meditation, including some rather famous studies showing that, for instance, in advanced Theravada monks, there is a much higher gamma activity around 40 Hertz. So potentially, if we can reduce this state via either neurofeedback or neurostimulation, and it's quite important to mention here that about 30% of people, they do not react to neurofeedback, but for some reason they're not trainable. It's like with antidepressant drugs, 30% of people, even after the second run, they do not respond to them. So that's where you can actually use neurostimulation to bring them up to this state so that they remember, they learn how does it feel to be in this state. And then at some point it's a bit like nicotine replacement, you just switch off the stimulation and they can get there themselves. And one more comment is when Michael Persinger has demonstrated his God helmet, and you've probably heard the story because it was widely on the news. Doesn't matter in this case whether it worked or not, but the interesting thing was the response from Dalai Lama. He said, if it helps people to reach enlightenment, go for it. So it seems to me that the Asian approach is far more open in this sense than a Western approach, partially because West is sort of still pervaded by substance dualism, and in the East it's limited to few schools which are not probably that important. And as you know, in higher Buddhist schools, nirvana is not the other shore. So once you stop splitting between mind and matter, suddenly it becomes a very useful technique. And while I agree that chanting mantras and so on could be a working technique which was empirically developed over millennia, now we actually have a chance to measure and a chance to improve. And I would in this case not contradict Dalai Lama and say, well, if it actually helps people to get there, then use it. This is one of the use cases I've listed on the slides. And at the same time, by using it, and it's an obvious point I didn't make there, you're still collecting data for research.
And we're going to stop you there so we can get a couple of other questions.
The future of business is nirvana.
There is a chapter in the book on spirituality and mindfulness and how that could to try and balance off all the technical. I think there's a gentleman here and then the lady there. Go, you got the mic. You have the power.
Possession is 9/10 of the law. I heard you earlier touch on education, and I guess one of the questions could be, if we're talking about the future of business, education as a business, because it is becoming, it's become very clear to many of us that we can learn a lot on our own and then take advantage of professors, mentors, and so on to get into deeper issues. But I don't see that, first of all, education in the Western world is really taking advantage of that much. Perhaps you know of public schools, public in the American sense, supported by government. Or do you see this, as I said, as a possible field for business development?
So 3 very brief points I'd make on that. One is, if you look at the big open programs and the massively open online courses, by far the biggest group of people using them are coming from the developing markets. It's about 70 to 80% of most courses. So So people taking access to free courses, the Khan Academies making it available for free. Secondly, there are a bunch of experiments going on in state schools, public schools in London, to try and blend in some of the content from the free and open into their education curriculum. Because if you can learn from someone better than the teacher you've got in the classroom, why not? And use the classroom teacher more as a facilitator rather than the deliverer of knowledge. And the third is the corporate world is jumping on this very, very fast. I was at an event earlier this week in Brussels where a huge technology corporation was now saying that their teams basically are doing a huge amount of their learning about new technology via Coursera. They're taking AI programs from various places. And they're now using it as a free education resource, but also an accelerated learning, just-in-time type approach. The challenge is whether we can create the abundance mindset around this that says, okay, build these open programs, but don't try and make a lot of money out of people for doing it. Take micropayments that make it widely accessible in a democratic and transparent way.
I've got 3 comments on that as well. My chapter in the book actually does talk about education as a precondition for better politics. Last night I was at the University of Cambridge. I was sitting next to a high-powered group of PhD students, and they were all doing Coursera courses. So rather than just getting the information from Cambridge University, they were filling in that gaps in their knowledge by looking at Coursera. And third, in London Futurists, on the 5th of September, it's not on our website yet, we will have a section dedicated to the future of education.
And my question, I'm sorry, was really more focused on the lower, primary and secondary education,
Yes.
which, we're training all our.
There's a lot of innovation going on around networks to try and get the teachers in to start understanding how to integrate this.
But that's been going on for so long and it's been so ineffective.
And it's always a challenge, isn't it? How do you scale up from pilots to rollout? And it always fails because there's money for the pilot, but no money for the rollout.
Which education and health are the 2 areas which have been the slowest to adopt new technology.
Right.
They've been in this long phase for a long time, but eventually the weight is going to be so powerful that at least some parts of the world are going to do well.
Yeah, can I respond to that? I think education and health and banking and finance, medicine, they all are going through the same kind of transition, and that is that the knowledge is available to ordinary citizens. So when somebody's got a medical condition, they go to the doctor. Very often they know more about it than the GP because they're able to do the research. The same is true in education. People will research things that they're interested in, and the big challenge for educators is that in universities sometimes the kids know more than the people who are teaching them. So educator, the role of the educator is transformed from somebody who has the knowledge and passes it on to being somebody who facilitates it. And the 2 sectors I think that are going to be most resistant to it are health and banking. And the reason is that we as individuals perceive risk in health, we perceive risk in banking, which gives us a reluctance to trust the impact of these new technologies. But eventually they will have the same impact as education and lots of the other fields.
Flip lessons is the idea that a traditional lesson you have a teacher standing up at the front of the class giving the same old boring lecture that they've given for years and years and years, and then the kids go away and practice it on their own and they're a bit lost and they don't know how. For the flip lesson, you watch a video that's the best video that's ever been recorded of that lesson being taught. You watch that before you come to class. When you're in the class, you learn in a peer-supported and teacher-mentor supported environment, and you do your learning collaboratively. It works really well, and it is being used in the private sector in this country, but it's not being used in the state sector much, sadly.
Is there any chapter in the book about sea studying? And if not, what is your take on sea studying to move into a ship which is independent of any country and create businesses there, how to avoid hindrance or regulations?
No one did that, but as I mentioned earlier, there's a guy called Mohammed Al-Bono who's doing this project about how would you create a country. And he's actually making a documentary and a film. And it's not necessarily going to be on board a ship. A few people talk about doing on board a ship. He's saying, could you actually take an island? And how would you create a country from scratch? You know, what would it be its purpose? Who would live there? How would you govern it? Would it live under its own laws completely, or would it be under the sort of, you know, would it be adopted by another country for defence and legal purposes? It opens up some really interesting issues. His big problem was that the first person he interviewed, and the opening video on the website, was a guy talking about the law of the sea. So within about 4 seconds, most people watching wanted to slit their wrists because it was quite dull, the law of the sea and the statutes of the sea. But it's a really interesting space to get into, and there's a lot of opposition from national governments about the idea of doing something that's outside the game. It's why there's so much opposition in a sense to Greece at the moment, which is sort of trying to do this. You know, people are so resistant to what Greece is trying to do, but actually what Greece is saying it's trying to do is to create a viable, thriving economy for the next 20 years that requires you to rewrite an awful lot of the rule books. And that's why so many of the European leaders are against it, because if it happened in Greece, they're worried there will be a knock-on effect across the rest of Europe.
Ironically, what Greece should probably do this weekend is sell one of its islands for exactly that. Exactly. They don't have enough cash to pay the ECB or something.
Or persuade a few of its people to pay tax, but yeah.
The guy that invented the Segway actually created an island.
Dean Kamen.
Yeah, exactly. And he had his currency backed by Ben & Jerry's and all this kind of stuff because he couldn't put a windmill on New York.
There's a few, yeah, I mean, a few of the billionaire class have decided that an island is the right. Yeah, I'm not sure they're offering the same kind of open, abundant society as we're thinking about. They're more of the kind of the barking scientist in ex-national type model. Let's get one of the hands that hasn't spoken before. Can we get one back there? Please.
I guess this question for David or anyone else. Because it concerns legislation. Business people in general are pretty flexible with most things. You just adapt to new situations. But the elephant in the room seems to be legislation and contract law. We talk about not needing workers in the future. You try getting rid of a worker that you don't want. It's very difficult and very expensive. And we have a large number of laws now that are simply not fit for purpose for the society we live in. That's just a gargantuan task to change it. And I don't know how we're going to change it fast enough to keep up with the changes.
There's two ways that scenario can play out. One of them is the kind of bad scenario, which is that a country which has these labour laws in place becomes increasingly uncompetitive because they're paying for more and more, and so the companies themselves are struggling, and therefore the companies go out of business because elsewhere in the world they're more competitive. But a more positive way in which it can play out is that we switch to a system whereby people can leave the company and still be paid quite well by one means or other through some universal basic income. And therefore it becomes a managed exodus rather than a state of war, in which case then it would no longer be such a struggle as you talk about. So which of these scenarios will play out, I think will be different in different parts of the world. But Robert, you look a lot at the evolution of law as well, don't you? I mean, you have a lot of clients who talk about the evolution of law and the evolution of employment law.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things going on there. One is increasingly this idea of business like just take as many people off your work, your headcount as possible, so that you can hire and fire them. People want that flexibility. It's not ideal for the citizen, but you're seeing more and more companies move that way because of this issue of wanting flexibility and wanting to get people in and out very quickly. But you're also seeing a second shift, which I think is going on, which is this idea of can we embed the law, can we automate the law, rewrite the law, so it can all actually be executed in software. So your employment tribunal would be a lot fairer. Today, if you want to take an employer to court, 95% of the cases fail that go to court, and mostly don't get to court because it costs you about £1,500 to take it. So people won't take their employer to court in the first place. So you might end up with a fairer system if it was all embedded in software and you could do the whole thing online. But both of you rendered your arguments and then you used a bit of AI to determine whether the dispute could be settled automatically or it actually required some level of human intervention.
You have a question?
Yes.
I would like to ask a question regarding these wearable technologies to monitor health. Because at the moment we have a situation where we are sort of victims. We overeat, we drink, then we go to medical professional to fix us. And then they give us medicine and which are supposed to help us. Pharmaceuticals are making huge profits and are very powerful. So I can see variables in large number of population will shift this balance. These companies will start losing profits, and if they don't want to adapt, how do you see the outcome of this?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And one of the problems with change and the impact of technology on different industry sectors is the reluctance of the incumbent providers of services to give up the territory. And we've already heard that the medical profession are going to be the last people to adopt these neurotechnologies. I'll give you a very quick anecdote of my own experience. I was pre-diabetic and I agreed to take part in a trial that's being run by the UK Diabetes Centre in Leicester. And because I've already been using these wearable technologies for almost 2 years at the time, I asked the leads of the project if they would collaborate with me and I could share my experiences of the use of wearable technologies. The project that they gave me, that I subscribed to, used a mechanical pedometer, and I had to, and everybody who took part in this scheme had to write down how many steps they took each day and keep a diary and then SMS the results to the diabetes centre. What the project leader of the diabetes centre said when I went and I was actually in there having my blood tests, and I said, can I meet with the project leader and discuss how we can collaborate? The message I got back was, oh yes, we knew you were coming, I'm sorry, we're not interested. You know, and that, I'm afraid, is the medical profession is bound by legislation, and they still think that they are the sole arbiters of health. And drug companies, pharmaceutical companies, they will all be challenged by what's going to happen with these devices.
Let's try and get a couple more quick questions in before we end.
Brief comment on the previous question.
Brief, Andrew, as in less than 7 minutes?
Well, okay, to be very brief, my message to Big Pharma is jump on board, it's inevitable.
Yeah,
many of the effects here are synergistic with drugs, so you can sell the both, and you can sell drugs better.
This question isn't to anyone specifically. Studies suggest that happiness has not meaningfully improved with recent improvements in technology, say 50, 70, 80 years. Is the development and deployment of synthetic or artificial happiness necessary to generally improve the collective happiness of humanity? Do we need a book on this?
You can see how we're all rushing to answer that one.
I can answer. I think you've. I think you've.
Let's make this 30 seconds each.
Yeah, okay. Very quickly. I think we saw something on one of the slides. We talked about bread and circuses. Bread and circuses were the Roman Empire's answer to keeping the population happy and subdued. And we could find the same thing, but technology providing bread and circuses in the future.
I mean, I think it's not about happiness. It's about having interesting problems to solve and interesting ideas to solve them. So we're driven to evolve and outthink every possible problem. Whether it's a meteor or whether it's we want to spread it across the universe. Happiness is really inconsequential. It's not going to get us there at all. I think maybe it's more like trouble, worry, and knowing how to conquer those problems is more interesting.
So there's more to life than happiness, and absolutely it's all about the human flourishing, and we can glimpse some states of enlightenment occasionally, and we think, well, why isn't life more like that more of the time? And with technology we have the tools to make that possible.
Well, I'm intending to buy a pint of happiness in the next few minutes.
I don't think you can reduce it to a single answer. I think some people are going to look for happiness that's scientifically or technologically mediated, others are going to look for it through a natural state of being. I think a lot of it is about the presence of choice, the presence of the ability to determine how things happen around you. And it's when that gets taken away that people start to become unhappy. When you feel like decisions have been made on your behalf over which you have no influence, hence the kind of people kicking back against the big tech companies misusing their data. So I think it's about making sure we have a way in society that the individual still has that freedom to determine how they get to happiness.
So we're at 5 o'clock. The famous historian Yuval Noah Harari did a whole course on humankind. And the end of his magisterial sweep of human history looked at the future. At the very end of this look at the future, he said the most important question, what do we want to become? Or even more important, what do we want to want? So we've often thought we want happiness, but maybe that's not what we want to want. So as we're figuring out what we want for our businesses, maybe that is the question to take with us to the pub. We will be regrouping in the Marlborough Arms pub, which is about 7 minutes walk from here, shortly. There'll be a chance to briefly chat in this room first, but we shouldn't stay here too long because Birkbeck would like us to be out by 5 o'clock, so we're already at our limits. But let's thank all the speakers who have given us a great deal to think about.